I'm Carmen James. I'm interviewing my mother, Barbara Redman, and today is December 6th, 2019. Good morning, Mom.
Good morning.
Why don't you give us your name and your date of birth?
My name is Barbara Ellen Redman, and my date of birth is August the 10th, 27.
1927. So
Yes.
that makes you how old?
I am 92 years old.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Sullivan, Indiana.
And
Population 1,503.
when you left, it was 1502?
Well, no, my two sisters left before me, so it was just flat 1,500.
Okay. How did you come from Sullivan, Indiana to Carlisle, Pennsylvania?
My brother was stationed at Carlisle Barracks, and he was married, and his wife became pregnant, and she wasn't very outgoing, so they asked me to come and live with them so she would have someone to socialize with.
And what year was that?
40, I don't know, 45? No, 46.
I was born in
46.
I was born in 1949, so I would say it was probably around 1946 or 7.
Yeah,
And he was at Carlisle Barracks?
yes.
Okay. Did he live on post or did he live
No, he lived within the city, Lincoln Avenue,
in what?
Carlisle.
Okay. And where did you live prior to, you were born in Sullivan, you moved to Carlisle. Where did you live prior to those?
I lived in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay. And so coming to Pennsylvania, that was like the first time you were ever to the East Coast?
No, I lived in New Brunswick,
New Jersey?
when my husband was in the service for a short while.
You're my dad?
No, my first husband.
Okay. All right. So you were married before,
Yes,
and that brought you to the East Coast?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
but not to stay permanently.
So you moved to Carlisle. How old were you when you moved to Carlisle?
About 21.
Okay. And how did you meet your husband? Your second husband, my father.
He was the brother of my girlfriend, Betty Thompson, and through her I met him.
Okay. And I guess you met him, you dated, you got married.
Yeah.
How did you hear about Mountain Street?
When we were dating, he would take me for rides, and we always ended up in Mount Holly, and he would turn around in the lane, which is across from our permanent driveway now, and go back to Carlisle. And the house had wooden shutters in the front on each side of the door. They were always closed.
And so that was when you first saw the house.
Yeah, I saw it every time we took a ride. He would always come to that point, turn around. But it held no great interest.
What?
It was just there.
Why did he choose Mountain Street?
We don't know.
So you would go on a ride and you'd come out to Mountain Street and turn around, and this house was, tell me about what Mountain Street looked like when you used to do that.
About like what it does now, only there was a blue crooked house where the Fosters lived, or Aunt Betty lived, and then there was a red shingled house that the Gumbies lived in. And then there was a shack across the street from me where Mr. Bill Jones, who old junk, lived. And otherwise, it's just about like it was then.
Was the Chestnut Grove there?
Yes, there was a Chestnut Grove.
Where Michael Gumby's house is now? That was
Yeah.
all a Chestnut Grove?
Uh-huh.
What was Cedar Street like?
Just like it is now. The church.
The houses, how many houses?
The only house that's been added is the White House on the corner of Cedar and Mountain.
That's the only one that's added.
Yeah.
What went away? What house isn't there?
Mr. Mosley's house burnt down.
And there wasn't any other houses beside Mr. Mosley's on that side of
No.
the street?
No. It went down and hooked on to Gumby's property.
Okay. All right. What about the cemetery behind the church? The Foster Cemetery, the Johnson Cemetery?
It was always growed up, and there was one burial there, which was Aunt Betty, and the Earring brothers said that they couldn't bury anybody there anymore because it was too underdeveloped.
There was a lot of weeds and things.
Yeah,
Okay.
blackberry brush.
How did you find out that this house that you used to see when you would drive out was for sale?
There was a young man that worked with my husband. My husband was his boss, and he told him that he and his wife was going to buy a house in Mount Holly Springs, and he was real happy. And he told him where it was, and my husband came home and told me, and he said, "That's a house where we turn around." And he said, I told him if he couldn't get it to tell me, and we would try to get it. And I said, no, it don't work that way. If he can't get it, he's not going to tell you because he's not interested in you getting it. I said, find out the realtor and we'll go talk to them and tell them that we want to be next in line. And so he did, and it was Mrs. Hartzell's mother.
That was the real estate agent?
In Holly. And we went to see her and said, we didn't want to jump in front of them, but if they couldn't do it, well, we wanted to be notified. So we didn't have a phone, so we gave her our neighbor's phone, and she called us and said it was available. And so then I started taking his discharge papers to the bank and all. And
Military?
We got a GI loan.
Okay.
That's it.
How much did you pay for the house?
$2,200, but she wanted $32. But the lawyer said that it was overpriced and that he should call her and tell her. So my husband spent 65 cents and called her in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and told her that it was overpriced. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I'll give you $2,200. And she hollered to her husband and said, Minor says it's overpriced, but he'd give us $2,200. He said, okay. So then that's where we went from there.
And that was in what year?
45?
No.
No?
The picture that we have says Minor Redmond tract November 1951.
Okay. Okay.
So it would have been 50. How long did it take you from the time Daddy called to the time you signed the mortgage papers?
Within the year.
Okay, so it was 51.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you got the house. Did you walk through the house before you bought it?
I think so, but there was a hole in the dining room floor where the refrigerator sat,
I remember that.
and they didn't empty it properly, and it rotted through. And then it had no heating system, so we had a coal and wood stove put in the kitchen, and we heated it up, and the heat made all the wallpaper
I remember
come
that.
loose, and
I remember that.
we had plaster with horsehair on the wall.
I think you still do.
Yes.
I'm interested in hearing what the street looked like.
The street was as is now, only it was gravel, and wasn't as wide, and it had grass from the gravel road to the property line.
How much grass was in front of, say, your hedge?
Well, there was enough grass that twice a summer a man with a mower that he sat on and a horse drew it would go down at one time.
And cut it?
Uh-huh.
That was public property?
And come back, huh?
That was public, that was the...
The borough of Mount Holly.
And they would cut it how many times a year?
Twice a summer.
Tell me about the people that lived on this street.
About the same that are now.
It wasn't a predominantly black neighborhood?
No, there was Catherine Calloway, the Gumbies, the Fosters, Mr. Jones, and then when we moved in... Mr. Mosley.
And Mr. Jones.
And Mr. Jones. Well, Mr. Mosley lived on Cedar Street next to the church.
Oh, that's right. But other than Mr. Mosley on Cedar Street, were there any African Americans?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. And just say who lived on Mountain Street again?
Mr. Mosley.
No, on Mountain Street, I'm sorry.
On Mountain Street was the Fosters, the Gumbies, and Catherine Calloway, and that's it.
When did the Scotts move in?
Oh, Scots moved in a long time after their children were in school, Catholic school.
When they moved in?
Mm-hmm.
And what about down the lane?
Down the lane.
Because I remember hearing about the Furman Farm.
Yeah, but that was long, long ago.
That wasn't...
No, that wasn't in my time.
Who was living down there when you moved in?
Doris, I forget.
Fonestock?
No. She had 2 sons that went to school with my boys.
Okay.
And she lived down there with her husband.
Okay. And when did the Stovers move down there? When did the Stovers move down there?
They were prior to her, I think.
Oh, so when you moved in, were the Stovers living down there?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Talk to me about what your house looked like, the yard and the house and...
Had 5 chicken houses.
5 chicken coops?
Mm-hmm. And they weren't shabby. And I had a garage that we warned our daughter not to go near because it was kind of shaky. And we were glad we did warn her because my husband told me one day he was going to tear it down, and he no longer went out and come back in. He said, well, it's down. And I said, it can't be. He said, I moved one board and it collapsed like a house of cards.
So you had 5 chicken coops.
Yep.
Yeah. Did they have chickens?
The people that lived there, the Howards did, and sold eggs.
Okay. Did you ever have chickens?
Oh, yes. I bought them 100 at a time from Sears and Roebuck, and the mailman delivered them. Back then, that's what happened, kind of ancient.
You had chickens in those chicken houses?
Oh, no, I got rid of all of them except one big, nice one.
And did you have an outhouse?
Yes, everybody did on Mountain Street.
And did everybody on Mountain Street have water coming into the house?
Oh, yes. And we didn't have water when Mother would come home from work. I would raise the dining room window and hold a lamp out the window while he dug so he could see to dig the water line in. And at that time we didn't have a sidewalk.
Oh, out the
Along
side
the-
window that I
Yeah, and we didn't have a sidewalk, so therefore he dug it into the side of the cellar and broke through, and
How long after you moved in did that happen?
pronto, right away.
Okay. But where did you get your water until that happened?
From the Gumbies,
You would go up with
or
what?
the Fosters.
With a bucket
Uh-huh.
and get water from, and how would they give it to you? Turn it on a tap or would they pump it?
Oh, I could get it from outside at Gumbies.
They had a tap, a
Yeah.
faucet. It was a
Mhm.
regular faucet.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it wasn't pump water or anything like that?
Oh, no.
Okay. And you had electricity in your house?
Oh, yes.
And tell me about the heat again?
We had no heat. We bought a coal and wood stove that we put in the kitchen. And there was a chimney that you could hook the stovepipe into, and it would go up through a chimney.
Oh.
But
And
it's
how long
there
did
no
you-
more
How long did you have that?
until we got our coal furnace.
When was that?
Oh, about maybe 2 years.
So about 52, 53? A coal
Yeah.
furnace?
Mm-hmm.
And when did you have an indoor, when did you said you had an outhouse. When did you get an indoor?
Well, I don't know.
You remember what grade I was in?
Do you remember
I
what?
think first grade.
Okay,
All right.
okay,
So that would have been around 55, 56.
yeah.
When did you tear the outhouse down? When did you get rid of the outhouse totally?
Well, it was just a straight building with a roof and a door.
It was a sad day for
And
me.
where you sat, huh?
It was a sad day for me. That was good reading, Ma. Good reading in there. So you bought the house, you moved in. No heat, no running water. You had electricity.
And the lawyer had said we were putting good money after bad money and we shouldn't buy it. But then, about 2 years later, he was running for some office and he stopped by and he said he wanted to tell us, he wanted to apologize because he's glad that we didn't take his word for it, that it was a very good investment and a very nice looking property.
And would you vote for me?
Huh?
And would you vote for me?
No, he was for Carlisle,
Oh.
and we lived in Holly.
What's the first memory you have of the church? What did it look like? The church, Mount Tabor Church.
About like it does now.
How about the cemetery?
It was growed up, it was weedy. Had nothing to do with it.
Do you remember the first funeral that was held there?
I guess Mr. Gumby,
That would be in '85.
Mrs. Gumby,
There had to have been funerals before then.
nobody died but Aunt Betty, and she was buried behind the house. So
There weren't any other cemetery burials like the Callaways or
they're buried outside the White Cemetery in Holly.
outside?
Catherine Cow, right at the entrance.
Okay.
And Edna Gumby. And Hattie will be buried there.
So the cemetery was overgrown. Do you remember a fence or a road going back to it or anything for
No,
the
there
cemetery?
was nothing.
Nothing.
You walk through a yard.
And the cemetery and the church. How many did? I know you sent your kids. You sent us, but did you and Daddy go there?
I went. Occasionally your dad went. Mabel Toner went sometimes. David Toner went sometimes. The Fonestocks from back in the mountain, they went. The young children went. That's their source of religious.
Did you ever go upstairs?
Heavens no. Did well to get in the door to sit on a bench.
What,
You got the worst case of poison ivy sitting in Sunday school. The window was out and the ivy vines growed inside and somehow you got it.
what do you remember about Miss Gumby?
Mrs. Gumby was the rock of the community. Everybody socialized with her and she was a source of information of years gone by, and she was a nice lady. And so was Mr. Gumby. We called her Grandma Gumby and Pop Pap Gumby. Everybody did. And there was, 12 Fosters? 9 kids and mother and father and Aunt Betty. No, Miss Venie.
And that was in the Blue House, the
Uh-huh.
Foster house,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Gumby house. Do you remember when they got indoor plumbing? Because they had I remember outhouses for both places.
No, I don't really remember. After we did.
Okay. What else do you remember about the services? You know, the kinds of things that.
We had Redman, milkman, postman, cleaners, Eddie's cleaners.
Oh, in a truck?
Pick it up and deliver it.
Now, you mentioned that they had somebody cut the grass on a cart that was drawn by a horse. Were these other services horseless?
No.
Or with a horse?
No, they didn't have horses.
Okay, so they were regular trucks. So
Yeah.
the milkman was,
In a milk truck, and the bread man was in a bread truck.
and the milkman, the
And
bread man would ring the door, or how would you get the bread?
Well, you knew what time he come, and you went out, and he saw you, and he stopped. And then we had vegetable man.
Was he in a regular driving truck?
He drove, I think, his car,
Okay.
but he lived up Cedar Street, and he had a farm, and he raised what is it?
Corn?
No,
Melons?
no. Asparagus.
Asparagus?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where the Kimmel's house is?
Uh-huh.
He had a farm up there?
Mm-hmm.
The milkman would come early in the morning?
No, he came around 12 o'clock.
The milkman?
And we had a aluminum milk box that sat on the porch.
I sort of remember you would leave notes in there for him as to what you wanted.
Yeah, and the aluminum box now is worth $20, I think,
Where's yours?
in the garage.
Okay, nice to know. What else did Anna Gumby teach you?
Teach me how to pick wild greens, dandelions and mustard and stuff like that.
What about slaughtering pigs?
Yeah, we had a pig to butcher, and she taught us about that. She and her husband. And it was an interesting life, because I came from country in Indiana and Illinois growing up.
And the country here was different?
Underdeveloped here. Okay?
Okay. Was Anna Gumby active in the church? I don't necessarily remember her attending that church.
Well, sure, she attended that church.
I don't remember her going.
She walked up there.
Did she?
Yeah.
She wasn't there for Sunday school.
No, she went to church.
Okay. I don't remember. Who was the minister when you first met?
Wallace. No, I don't know who.
It was a lady.
No, she came after him.
No, she came before him.
Well, I don't know. You have a more vivid memory than me at 92.
Okay. So who were the people that lived on the street besides you gave me the African American families, but who were the other families that were living here when you moved here?
Ungers lived up on the corner.
They were there in the 50s?
The Bakers? Mm-hmm. No, not the Bakers. Kimmy. He died on Thanksgiving Day. Ethel McLaughlin and her mother lived in the little house across from me.
The Lynches before them.
Uh-uh.
Till Lynch lived on the corner.
After Ethel McLaughlin and her mother.
Okay.
And Till Lynch had 5 kids.
Right.
And she lived there with her her husband and herself, and I think his mother came and lived with him for a while.
The house for Mr. Bill Jones, what happened to that?
It was a black shack, and he died, and the boar had quite a bit of clutter, and the burr had the fire company use it as an exercise, and they burned it down, and the whole town turned out, and they thought that was a jolly good thing. And I thought it was pitiful for them to rejoice over something like that, because they had that black shack up the road look worse than it. And anyway, everybody has their own values.
What happened to Mr. Mosley's house?
It burned down.
The stone house, and then he moved.
His sister got sick and he went to Philly and left something burning inside, and the house burnt.
And then he moved into.
The shed.
What happened to that?
Boy, you're nosy.
It's history, Mom.
Huh?
It's history.
Is it? Well, you better capture it because it's escaping me. Mr. Mosley's house. He had a castle. He had built a house out of mountain stone, and it was 2-story, and it was like a castle. It was a sight to behold. It really was. And it burnt inwardly. Got it, and he moved to the shed, and then he increased the size of the shed to the comfort of his own. And that's about the size of it.
Well, how did that building go away?
Is it still there?
No.
Well,
they tore it down when he moved out?
They needed the lumber for something else.
There was a foundation next to the Foster's house, between the Foster and the Gumby's house. Was that ever a house when you moved here?
Not in my time.
It had burned down?
I guess. It wasn't there. The foundation was there.
Was there, just the foundation.
But it wasn't a very big foundation.
And the house where Edna is living now, was there a house on there?
No. No.
Had you heard anything about the house that was there?
Was never a house there.
Okay. What about the corner of Cedar Street where the White House is now?
I know nothing about that.
You don't remember that?
There was nothing there.
Okay. Never anything there. What kind of public services? You said they cut the grass in the summer twice a year. What about snow removal and that kind of stuff? Did we have?
I don't think we had snow removal. I think cars just busted their way through the snow.
And what about the stores and the shops in Holly?
We had a drugstore. We had Bill's restaurant.
Was the hi-hat there when you moved?
No.
All right.
And that was about it.
What about Frank Bob's?
Oh yeah, we had Frank Bob's.
What about the phone company?
What about it?
Did you have a phone company?
Yeah, it was on Cedar Street.
The phone company.
Oh, on the corner, yeah.
What about supermarkets?
Arnold's. And there was another one,
Enders?
Enders.
What about doctor's offices and dentist offices?
Dr. Matlin, Dr. Ely, Dr. Robbins, the dentist. That's about the size of it.
Movie theater?
Yeah. We had it. And they turned it into an adult movie. And then they forgot.
Okay, let's move on. What about schools?
What about it?
Talk about taking us to school buses. Did we have school buses?
No, they walked to school. And they came home at noon when I first moved there. And then after a while they stayed over.
So you would,
12 o'clock.
that's your phone?
It's 12 o'clock.
Oh my God.
Poke it. And keep it, because it's going to go off again later on.
So we would walk home from school for lunch
Yes,
and then have to walk back? How long
Yeah.
did we have for lunch?
an hour.
I must have walked pretty fast. Where was I walking from? Where the firehouse is now?
Uh-huh.
So I would walk home, have a
Not
quick,
only you, all the kids.
and then walk back.
Yeah.
And when did I start taking my lunch?
Well, I don't know. I know you kids were afraid of the bridge, that walking bridge over the creek. You were very afraid of it. Lunch is going to fall through the cracks.
I remember that. Do you remember the Deer Lodge? Was that then?
It was very famous.
Was it then when we were little, when young?
Mm-hmm.
There was always a Deer Lodge up there.
Not always.
As African Americans, was there any place we couldn't go in Holly?
When the man before the Greeks held the Deer Lodge, they couldn't go there if they stopped. He was the only place from Gettysburg to Carlisle, and he would say he was full.
To feed them.
Beg your pardon?
Sorry, to feed them. Or it wasn't a sleeping place.
Yes, it was sleeping and eating.
And he would say they were filled. Anything else that
Nothing.
you weren't able to use in Holly?
Not that I know them.
Okay.
Wasn't that much.
How did people get from Carlisle to Mount Holly?
There used to be a bus. I think it cost a quarter. Because when you went to summer school, you had to catch it. And you stayed at your grandmother's and come home with your dad.
The other thing, I remember you telling stories about Miss Carrie Haynes coming from Carlisle before you bought the house.
Yes, years ago, she told me that the adult colored families in Carlisle would rent a sleigh, a horse-pulled one, and come from Carlisle to the Howards where I live now, and they would have hot chocolate and conversation, and then go back. That was a highlight of the activities in the wintertime.
How often would they do that?
I don't know.
All right. Mom, so what did she tell you about the house that she remembers it was log?
Yes, it was the living room and dining room downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs, and it was a log house. And then
Who was living there when she used to come out?
the Howards, I guess, they lived there 40 years for $7 a month. They paid more in rent than I paid for the house in full. What about it?
Does she remember when the kitchen was added?
Yeah. She remembered when
Did it have electricity when she came?
Now that she didn't say. No, that didn't, because Mr. Goodling, or whatever, put electric in my house about 3 years before we bought it,
Okay.
at the most, or maybe 2. He didn't put any ground wires in my house, so he did it as cheap as possible.
Who paid for that? The Howards? Were they still living there?
No, Beulah Schenck, New Jersey, she owned the house.
Okay.
And the reason she sold it is because the state notified her that she hadn't settled the estate and they were going to take it over, and she had a given number of time that she had to sell it or lose it. So that's why she put it up for sale. She was a caterer in New Jersey.
And who were her parents?
Them Coles and people.
The Coles. Okay. Did Carrie Haynes say anything about the other houses?
And Aunt Betty Johnson's people.
Did Miss Carrie Haynes say anything about the other houses that were here?
No,
Do you know who built your house?
no. On the deed it tells you.
Did Miss Carrie Haynes know anything about the cemetery in the Johnson Cemetery,
No,
where Aunt Betty's buried?
she never talked about it.
Do you remember seeing it? Do you remember?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Well, all you have to do is walk straight from Foster's backyard along the line, and Aunt Betty's buried.
What did it look like whenever?
A bunch of weeds.
Okay, but how many tombstones were back there?
I don't know. Elizabeth wanted to get to Aunt Betty's grave and had Mr. Kimball take his bulldozer and make a path in it, knock down a lot of, or moved a lot of tombstones, which were like bricks. And Holly had a brick factory, and I guess they had them engraved or whatever.
Do you remember how many were back there?
Oh no, Carmen, there was oodles.
Oodles?
And
Oodles back there?
And Larry, when he built his mother's new house, he had the debris from it heaved up on part of the cemetery.
You think?
I know.
Okay.
The truth will set you free.
But you say there were a lot of headstones up there?
Yeah,
A lot of them.
flat bricks.
Okay. All right. Anything else you can remember about the street that you think people should know? About the cemetery? About the church?
No. It was just a gravel road, and then finally they blacktopped it, and it used to be wide. I mean narrow.
You're talking Mountain Street.
Yeah, it used to be narrow, and now it's full
You
black.
always had a mailman, or did you have to go to the post office?
At one time, we had to go to the post office, and it was in the bank building on 34 side.
On the
There were
square.
steps, and they took the steps away because people sat on them.
And so then you started to get mail delivered to you,
Yes,
and you had to put in a mailbox.
yes, on the opposite side of the street, because that's how it was designed.
And the shutters, the wooden shutters, when did you take those off the house?
After Dad died. He died 20 years ago.
And you always decided you would live here, you would never go back to the Midwest?
My family's here.
Now,
Yeah. My husband's family was here. And that made my children's family here. And they know nothing about the Midwest and don't care to know nothing about the Midwest. They consider them country.
all right, well, thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome.